So, thanks for the introduction. Basically, this strand is also all about evaluation use. So I want to speak today briefly about an area that is often very much overlooked. What brought me to this area is that I'm working in evaluation as an evaluator, but my background is in communications, corporate communications, organizational communications. Before I've worked more in evaluation in the last 10 years. So I've always had an eye out, actually, to see, well, how are people actually presenting evaluation findings? Basically, as you all probably know, it's an area of concern. How evaluation findings are used for both evaluators and commissioning bodies is something that's constantly coming up as a question and as a sort of a sore point. And studies have been made in different sectors, humanitarian sector, development, for example, that they point to different reasons as to why evaluation is not being used. And you can see some listed here: quality issues, relationships, etc., external influences. Now, of course, the way evaluation findings are presented also have an influence on their use. And studies have shown that in terms of how information is visualized, how it's presented is very important for its consumption. Not just in evaluation, but in anything. Advertising, corporate communications, etc. So what I'm going to look at, basically, in the next couple of minutes is sort of 7 points in this area. Now, basically, to set the scene, most of you probably know Lee Cronbach because he's well known for a statistical measure, the compact alpha. What he's less well known for is a thesis he contributed to in 1981, basically on evaluation reform. He was one of the authors of it. And basically he made a number of statements about evaluation that the team had wrote. And basically these two have particular relevance for evaluation use and how evaluation is used. In the first one, which is number 9 of his thesis, for example, you can see that the commissioners complain that messages are not useful, while the evaluators complain that the message is not used. So as an evaluator, you've probably heard that many times, or thought that many times. And particularly the last one, 49, is particularly relevant to what I'll talk about in the next couple of minutes. Is that basically, so many evaluations are reported with a thoroughness which is completely overwhelming for many publics. So it's something to keep in mind, and also when we want to communicate findings in evaluation. So basically, what I'll do is I'll take you through 7 ways to present evaluation findings. Now, honestly, some of these are not very new, actually. Some are newer than others. But simply, it's not studied enough, it's not thought about enough. When you actually finish your evaluation report, how is it going to be used? How am I going to present it first? The first one, quite simply, summary sheets. This is often, some examples up here. One from UN Human Rights, one from ILO, 2 international organizations. Basically, this is often extract of the executive summary, but importantly, it has to be a standalone document. It has to be able to be read without the 55 report behind it. That's often a challenge for many evaluators to write it in such a way. Also, if it can be illustrated through charts, tables, summary information will be useful for the consummator. Because you always have to remember that I've done plenty of evaluations, and I'm always looking and interested to see how many people are actually reading the report. I think on average, it's between the person who thoroughly reads the report, you're looking at perhaps less than 20 people. So you have to always bear that in mind in terms of who's going to look at what information that you're producing. Secondly, also linked to the first area, still in the printed document area, are sort of findings tables. Now, this can be very useful when you have an evaluation with a clear set of questions, objectives, indicators, where they're measured against the scale. Now, of course, you have to present this in a context, or else you'll be accused of dumbing down your evaluation findings. Nevertheless, this can be something that's very useful, particularly as you present to, for example, higher management, large forums, for example, where a summarized format is really appreciated and needed. And if you've structured an evaluation in a way where it can be reduced to a series of indicators or criteria, it can be very useful for the reader. Scorecards is an interesting one because scorecards has really taken off in the corporate sector. Scorecards are more seen as a monitoring tool. So we can look at monitoring of different services, monitoring of, for example, online activities, etc. As Ricardo, the previous speaker said, monitoring is not necessarily big in so many sectors. At the same time, if you have a program over a number of years that has been evaluated several times, a scorecard, and this one here you can see is a scorecard of an event over 4 years, evaluated on some key data over the years, and particularly for that year in 2009. It can be a good summary also for consumers to be able to get a feeling for what the evaluation, what are the main conclusions. Once again, it's not appropriate for all areas, but it can be a useful summary in many situations. Interactive web pages. These are actually used less than what we would think for evaluation, given the advances in technology, flash technology, other technology, and basically this is an example from an agricultural program. You probably can guess the country, it's Afghanistan. Once again, it's more focused on monitoring. And it's quite interesting because you can put your mouse over and you can sort of indicate the area and you can see how they are doing in terms of their targets for a monitoring and evaluation project. So in terms of transparency, information up to date, it's also a quite interesting concept. This one I haven't seen many organizations or evaluation processes use, but I think it's something that's we're going to see more and more in the future. Photo story is another interesting one that I've seen used in several evaluations. It's quite interesting because it's basically a visual summary of an evaluation process or of the evaluation results. This was done by Mercy Corps, working in the humanitarian development field. And this is just one page of a 4-page sort of comic strip. Now, it might seem simplistic, you're trying to communicate complex ideas, but for certain audiences it can be very useful, and it can be something that's very easily to read for many people, many audiences. Once again, it's something that also, you don't see it very much, but I'm sure it's going to be more and more used, particularly not only in presenting evaluation findings, but also in the evaluation process itself. Blogs, you all know what blogs are, I guess. It's interesting to see, from what I've seen, how little blogs are used in presenting evaluation findings. Blogs are often used basically to say, here's our report, there it is. What blogs are not used for so much is to have that sort of interactive discussion with people. I've seen several evaluations where they've used it in the process of doing evaluation to collect information and opinions. Here you see one on the left-hand side from a post from LNAP. And the other one is perhaps another interesting example from Climate Eval, which is basically looking at evaluations in the climate change area. And they're presenting the results, and they're encouraging a discussion on the results. So social media is interesting, but social media also incurs a certain level of interactivity that perhaps not all organizations and evaluators are ready or willing to have. Another area is also what we would call multimedia video report. So this is the notion that you basically put together a short video or a multimedia report that summarizes the evaluation findings. This one is one I worked on myself for an evaluation where I was the team leader. And we proposed this to the organization. It's ACRO, it's a climate change resilience program in Africa. And basically we put together a 9-minute multimedia clip. So we say a multimedia clip is not just people talking, it's a combination of animation, key points coming out of the evaluation, and interviews with people on the field that were involved in the program. So you can see the link later. You can also see it on YouTube. You can be perhaps the 105th person to see it, which is more than have read the report, I can tell you. So basically, these 7 basically, and that's number 7. So you can see it's very quick. Basically, there's different points. When I thought about this, as I've used most of these methods myself in trying to think about evaluation and evaluation usage. And basically, I came up with 7 tips, once again 7, for basically, if you're interested in using these new ways, what you should think about. Firstly, I think the first thing is that some thought needs to be given before the evaluation commences. So for example, if you're interested to document, for example, using multimedia, using video, during the evaluation process, then you've got to think about that before you start the evaluation. In terms of the organization commissioning the evaluation and the evaluators have to discuss and decide how we're going to do that. Some evaluations now have a sort of best practice where they try and come up with a promotional, or perhaps it's too big of a word, a communication plan of action for the evaluation findings once they're ready. Linked to that, many tools can be made simply, but a budget is often required. To make a simple multimedia video like this, we're not talking tens of thousands, we're talking several thousands euros just to have someone, you know, who can do the editing and some animation, because we did most of the filming with our phones on the field. So it doesn't have to be, we're not looking at, you know, corporate communication videos that cost tens of thousands of francs. So basically, many of these things can be made simply, but you still need to think about a budget at the start of the process, I believe. Perhaps the third point is that once these key findings are finalized, you need to give some thought into what are the key points that you want to be communicated. So this is the notion of how can you reduce the complexity of your findings to some key messages. Now, in the video I just showed you, it's 9 minutes long. It's perhaps 5 minutes too long, because we didn't manage to reduce the number of messages, so we were too thorough. So the key point is, and this is what communicators will tell you, you have to be able to reduce your findings to 4, 5, maximum 7 key messages. Most people, studies show, cannot cope with more than 7 messages. That's why I chose 7. So, and once again, you have to think about that. You can do some planning, but you really, if you're doing evaluation, you know, in a robust and correct way, you won't know what the findings are until the end, if you see what I mean. So, you can think about it at the start, but also at the end. Hopefully, it'll be when the most interesting points will come through and think, okay, that's what we should be communicating. Fourth point, the tools you use will largely depend upon the level of interactivity you desire. So basically, you know, paper, summary tables, fact sheets, they're very static. There's no interactivity with an audience. A blog, a video, interactive presentation is going to be more interactive by its nature. So, as I said before, if you're willing to have a discussion with the public, if you're willing to have that level of interactivity, you can do that. I mentioned this before, and this applies to these new methods, but also any methods. Findings of an evaluation will be little seen without a promotional strategy. So you have to think how you're going to promote it. Linked to that, social media, you can use that for awareness raising, you can use it for interactivity, but social media is also very good as a simple distribution tool. And that's what perhaps how people are using social media, for example, for distributing reports, findings, etc. So you can think of it. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, you know, for people who don't want to think about this, commissioning bodies and evaluators, studies really do show that basic visualization of findings, you know, do increase understanding and retention of messages. So you have to keep that in mind the next time you're producing your fantastic word report. You have to think about how will this be read, how will it be consumed. You can see these slides where else? But on my blog. You can be perhaps the 36th person to view them on SlideShare. Okay, thank you very much.